asked the emergency room physician if they could feel more record, and they said no. Which again, I don't know if there's medical legal issue, but I have no problem with it. I can tell you that. I don't see a problem.
Okay.
Let me just print.
Yeah. Because like the Borrelia test, so they have an option of negative, equivocal, and positive, and I just wanted to see what the proteins were, like what the results actually were, because they're just given like this general.
Yeah, no, sometimes it's not very clear.
Yeah.
So let me just, I think there's one more. Let's see, hopefully it worked. Let's hope everything is here. Okay.
So far so good. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is amazing. I think somebody must have done something because I've never gotten this kind of response.
Uh-huh.
Like where they just say, oh, you go to medical records. They never.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way it looks, I can tell you sometimes it's confusing.
Right.
But let's go over. So this is the first one. I just print them in the order. I mean,
Okay.
It may be kind of out of. So this is the Babesia. So if you want highlighters or something to write on this.
I mean, I've got this red.
So it's kind of hard. So the test is this one.
Okay,
Babesia microti.
Right.
That's the test.
Right.
Then IgM, IgG.
Right.
Now, this down here is the reference range.
Right.
And this is the result here.
Right.
So it means it's not detectable.
Well, and the thing is, wouldn't the reference range, so the reference range is less than 1.10 proteins.
Yeah.
So you can have the proteins, and they're saying that you can have 1.10 proteins or one cup.
So essentially what it means is that, like, and I'm not sure which method they use, by the way. They don't say. Anyway, the thing is there's a cutoff at some point, and they say if we detect, well, it's an antibody,
Right.
if it's a certain amount, and if it's below that, there may be some antibody, but we think it's not real.
Right, and I could test that. I mean, I'm like,
So,
if it's
yeah.
0 antibodies, then I'm okay, 0. But if so, that's why I want the
And
actual
that's
quantities.
and that's you're not gonna get it because they cannot quantify it below that.
Interesting.
That's a lot of tests, by the way. You will see, if you take an example of viral loads, what we do a lot, for instance, hepatitis C, that we see a lot with people with chronic hepatitis C. Well, no, C is a bad example. Well, actually, it's a good example. With hepatitis C, when the test comes back, you give a number, and when they say not detected, it means not detected. 0, it's gone. Hepatitis B or HIV, for instance, they give you a range, and they say we can detect it from, I think it's 20 copies up to I don't know how many millions. And sometimes you get a result that says it's less than 20, but we detect something, but we cannot quantify it. And then they sometimes really say it's undetectable. I don't know if that makes sense.
Right.
You have a true undetectable.
Right.
You have 20 or above that they quantify.
Right.
And then there's a gray area where they say, well, we detect something, but we cannot be specific enough.
And that, like,
but
if
this test, it doesn't give you that. It just like if it's less than that, then it's negative.
Yeah,
but it
well, to
doesn't
me-
give you a number.
To me, that's not logical, and that's
Yeah.
okay. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I
and,
know.
and I'm skeptical of the
But
results.
It's just the way it is. So
Yeah.
this is again. I don't know if you. So the result is the top one here.
Right.
So
and,
this is negative.
I mean, that's formally negative. However, is that a true undetectable?
We can't say.
Right. Okay.
See,
there we go.
your point
That's
is well
fine.
taken,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Touché.
Yeah. No, this is exactly. These were the chemistries, and I mean your red cells, white cells. It's always interesting. Every time you check, everything. Every time you see an arrow, it means it's abnormal. You may have been a bit dehydrated, but we look at this. This is, I think, I never remember the anion gap is the. I have to go back because I haven't calculated. It's like the chloride and the CO2 added. It's sodium minus chloride and CO2, and 3 is a bit low, but again, if you're a bit dehydrated, it can affect the chloride, so there's nothing I would worry about. The iron studies, at least, were normal. So again, same thing. this is a good example. It's non-reactive. So again,
So
essentially,
is that a complete 0 then?
that one, let me think. Yeah, I think it's the same as we discussed before. It's so low that nothing happens, so that either means that there's nothing, or it could be a little bit, but not enough to trigger a response.
But if that little bit is, then it's an indicator of some of the protein,
Yeah.
just however minor.
Yeah. So and that's also the question about, especially that test, for instance, we know what's called, there could be cross-reactivity with something else. And I think that's why sometimes they say we cannot say more, because you can have, let's say, an antibody to something, disease A, and may trigger a response to this. So that's why they try to find the right cutoff. Mm-hmm. But this is the same idea. I think this just means that either there's nothing, or it's a little bit, but not enough to trigger a response.
Right. And so for me, like, I do think there's something to it if they're, and that's why I kind of want to get, like, I just want to get the ones that say 0.
So for instance, this one, the HIV test, that one is negative.
Yeah,
that one is a total surface antigen.
So that one.
So surface antibody, hepatitis C antibody, these are kind of all or nothing.
Nice.
I would say.
Great.
I mean, you could find rare instances of something, but for all practical purpose, this is not the viral load. Again, we check virals for HIV, for hepatitis B and hepatitis C. We check viruses. That's why I told you about but this is for the antibody. But those, for all practical purpose, if they're negative, usually we assume they're
0.
negative. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
So these are 0. Kind of these I wouldn't worry about. Could there be something hiding type of thing?
Yeah.
There's always, I'm sure you can find a 1 in a million case of something, but these I would say I'm pretty confident that there's nothing there.
So absolute 0.
Yeah. So this is another one of those where, like you say, they tell you a titer, and they were all negative, but it's another one of those. There could be something that was there, but just not enough to trigger. Anaplasma, the same thing. The brucella, same thing, I would say probably. Well, it's more than, that one I would put in the same. The Q fever. Essentially, there are those tests where you have like, you see this number 1 to 16.
Yeah.
You have here the 1 to 20 or 1 to 64, or you have the 1 to 30. These are what's called dilution. Essentially, they take your serum and they dilute it, and so if you react by this, so that's the interesting thing. Essentially, the number is the proportion of what your original serum is. So you take the reactant, your serum, it's 1 to 1. You dilute your serum by 2, it becomes 1 to 2. You dilute by 2, 1 to 4, 1 to 8, 1 to 16. So for the 1 to 16 would be 1 to 2, 4, 8, like a 4-time dilution. And so perhaps you may have reacted at 1 to 1, but you say, well, that's not significant. Does that make sense? So that's why those tests are a bit less specific, because you need to reach the point where it's still...
It seems to me if you react at 1 to 1, that should qualify as something.
So I think that's where the problem is. It's probably because there were too many what's called false positive, that something else reacts with this. And I think that's been the problem with a lot of biologic tests, that no matter how, again, we say, specific it is for one thing, it can react. You have this cross-reactivity with an antibody. And that's why you have those dilution to kind of remove that thing and some of those cutoff may be arbitrary,
Oh, yeah.
Then Lyme, so again, IgM, negative, and there's no IgG. Oh, IgG, IgM, both of them were negative.
And
and the C6 was negative as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in the C4 and the C25. You were pushing the C6.
Yeah, because again, I think I looked at some other tests and I said either I don't order them or I don't see a value for those. The C6 is one of the accepted tests for Lyme. So, like I said, I would not, like you had me do the Western blot, same thing, I would not do a Western blot because the IgG and IgM are negative. So typically I wouldn't do a Western blot here.
So is the IgG, IgM, is that 100% negative? Is there...
So it's the same, I would say, you may have perhaps, this is the one, by the way, this is the one category where they say this. where usually they would say they would consider this to be truly negative, and there's this gray zone here. So at least for me, I would say if it's less than this, then it's negative.
But what about...
Because they give that gray zone where they say, well, if something happens, perhaps, but...
And in considering my symptoms, though, because I am not my lab tests, I am also my symptoms and my history. And so my history is Lyme disease, the antibodies that showed up with the bullseye. So it meant that I had a first Lyme exposure, and then my second Lyme exposure, or however many, triggered that bullseye. So what do you consider? What do you think about in terms of
in that setting? I would say that you were treated successfully, that Lyme is gone, and with the time, the immunity kind of, wanes away. That would be the interpretation, that you had Lyme disease, that you were treated for it, and with time the antibodies just go away because you're cured.
Yeah. And what about my symptoms, my current symptoms?
So that's, like we said, we look for many potential explanations. I don't have a good explanation.
Okay. And
I'll be honest with you, we looked at, Lyme because you had an exposure, and we know it can, sometimes have a chronic infection.
But in terms of number one, there's many different versions. Like we didn't do myomotai, and that's there's like a bunch of different Borrelia, and then there's a bunch of different of these other guys. Like I'm positive for Epstein-Barr. And I'm curious about, I have herpes A.
Yep.
So, we took a stab at it, but I don't think we're completely...
So the thing is, again, we did this. I don't know if we can do testing. We did Ehrlichia, we did Bartonella, we did Babesia.
We didn't do all of Ehrlichia, all of Bartonella. There's Borrelia, there's Myomotai, there's parkour, there's Mianoi. And that's not even all of them.
Because we did, which one did we have? The Bartonella. So we have Henseley and Quintana.
So we didn't even do Burgdorferi?
Oh, wait a second. We did Anaplasma. We did this one. We did.
So we did
Bartonella. We did Bartonella. What do they say here? Yeah, we did the Bartonella Henseley. So I can also do it here. We did Borrelia. We did Ehrlichia. We did Bartonella. We did Microti. We didn't do these.
Can we do those?
Yersinia.
And I think my ex-boyfriend had Yersinia.
Because this is a stool test. I don't know how. Yeah, it usually lives in the stool. So I'm perplexed. So
is that a blood test?
So for these, there's antibodies. I know. Again, I wouldn't expect them to cause the symptoms. They usually cause more like respiratory symptoms. These are.
But I have air hunger, and one of my symptoms is like certain things cause it difficult to breathe.
Mm-hmm. So this one, you're seeing, I'm like, I can look, but I'm only aware of stool testing. But let's take a look.
But I think my last boyfriend had that. He was camping, got this hornet stung him in the neck. He had this big bell bulb. And, then they went back from camping and he got treated and stuff like that. But his eyes were always yellow. They still are.
That wouldn't be Yersinia.
Oh, okay.
That would be, you can have, from a tick bite, you can have what's called tularemia. But that's a...
he got it from a wasp, a stinging.
I'm that's why, Yersinia, there's also Yersinia pestis, which is the plague, which is something completely different.
That's what I was wondering.
But usually Yersinia is a stool. Yersinia. That I know of, Yersinia. Yeah, it's really, let's see what they say. Yeah, and it can disseminate, but really it's something that you get from it's a GI thing. So that one, I'm not sure what to say about that one here.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of its, because I had when I was
Because just to let you know, also the Epstein-Barr and CMV, these you can have. And again, herpes usually causes some outbreaks, and then same thing. This is not. These are not. I mean, all of these four here are shoot. Yeah. What's called herpes viruses.
Oh.
Herpes 1, herpes 2, varicella zoster, CMV, Epstein-Barr. There's, I don't remember how many others. Herpes 6. I mean, there's a whole. So one thing they all have in common, all the herpes viruses, is that once you get them, you're infected for life.
Right.
And they can reactivate.
And that's what I wonder. I wonder if that's what hurt my brain. Like, I actually, because I feel like my brains are messed up, and I'm like, did it go into my brain?
So typically when it happens, it's kind of an acute meningitis type of thing. You really have bad headache, you can have fever and whatnot, and then it's herpes 2. I mean, let me be more specific.
Sure.
Herpes 1 can reactivate and go to the brain and causes what's called herpes encephalitis. Now that's a deadly disease. If you have it, if you're not treated, you die. I mean, this is one of the worst disease I can think of I've ever seen. Herpes 2 can reactivate, and it doesn't really cause an encephalitis, which means the brain itself. It causes a meningitis, so it's the envelopes of the brain. But usually, again, it's high fever, headache, and interestingly, it's probably self-limited. When we diagnose it, we treat it, but usually it kind of comes and goes. But it's not a kind of a chronic infection. And that's the key thing with all of those diseases. They don't really cause chronic infection. They can reactivate and then they go away. Now, one exception, actually two exceptions, would be Epstein-Barr and CMV. When you have somebody who's completely immunosuppressed, but we talk about, somebody who had a bone marrow transplant and has graft versus host disease and things like this. The virus can run, out of control. It doesn't really cause symptoms, but it can cause a secondary cancer for Epstein-Barr, for instance. So we all tell people there is something such as chronic Epstein-Barr or chronic CMV, but that's not you. That's people who have an organ transplant, again, bone marrow transplant, or end-stage AIDS or something like this.
I would like to get tested, though.
Because what we would do, typically we can check if you were ever infected. And we know, for instance, that
I did get a positive EBV test. I don't know if that's helpful.
Do we have it here, or can we scan it?
I was seeing a nurse, Denny Lovett, and so that's like